Everybody, my name is Shawggy, and with the good co-host of DeviantRin, today of the Lag of Legends podcast, we're going to be talking about the fair
The stupid
And the broken.
for
Dungeons and Dragons.
today. We have a special guest today, known as BookLover. She is a good friend of mine and Rin's, and we also have her players of her Friday night campaign. Go ahead and say hello to the group, everybody.
Hello.
How's it going, all?
So, today I'd suggest, Rin, why don't you start us off with what you think is the fair for D&D?
Honestly, I'd have to say one of the most, fair and balanced editions that I've played was actually second edition. Second edition fixed a lot of the issues that first edition had, and it also cut out a lot of the superfluous bullshit that was in first edition. But at the same time, it did so via subtraction. And that's something that a lot of games have done throughout the years, and it's something that I've never really liked or understood. I've always preferred for games to patch or change things versus just straight up taking them out and saying, look, this is better now. You know, you wouldn't make a cake and take out the frosting and say, look, it's healthier now. No, it's just a shitty cake now. But overall, though, second edition was one of the most fair games that I have played because everyone had a very specific role and everyone had the ability to shine for the most part, with the exception of Rangers, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But I loved second edition mainly because of the simplicity of it. Everyone went in, second edition was also heavy in dungeon crawl, so everyone went in, they knew their roles, they knew their tactics, they went in, they got the job done, they get out. It was very, straightforward. And that is something that I can appreciate because as D&D, progressed, it got more and more and more complex and more innovative, and that's a good thing. As games get older, they do need to change so that they can keep on going. But despite that, I do have to say that I appreciate that there were simpler times with D&D before, you had all these, fancy class features and gimmicks, and multi-classing hadn't really come into its own yet.
Yeah.
All these things that we take for granted now. Second edition didn't have any of that. It was just, you're the fighter, you have your pretty great sword. You're the wizard, you have your great spells, and so on and so forth. The rogues were sneaky, the monks were really good at a lot of different skills. They were basically like the secondary skill monkeys, and so on and so forth.
Right. I would state that first edition was a little bit difficult, of course, because I started off with first edition. I only did like maybe 1 or 2 campaigns of it, and then I just stopped playing it because I was getting really frustrated with how, of course, I would give it a scenario here. My DM at the time, I was trying to kill a skeleton as a paladin. I got a net 20. I was supposed to kill it, but my sword was stuck in its rib cage, and I was like, "Well, I can just rip it out, right?" He goes, "Well, no. You've spent up your turn. It's someone else's turn." So our ranger tried to shoot the skeleton's skull to see if it would instead just knock the skeleton's body in order to be able to get my sword out, but then even the arrow was just sitting in the skull, and it just was getting very, very technical. In a sense of it was getting absurd for how realistic it was. And I was like, I do understand the realisticness of this, but it's also there is a certain point where you need to not cross in a sense. And that's, I would say, not annoy the shit out of your players, if you know what I mean. And
Yeah,
first
we don't
edition,
want to roll to not bite our tongues when we're eating.
yeah, first edition was, sure, I would say fair, I would say still, though. because of course it was still brand new. First edition is first brand new, so it's not much they could have really done. They just made it and boom, there you go. And made it somewhat simplistic, but also very much complicated at the same time, if you know what I mean. So I would say first edition's also in the fair, aka the balanced. And 5th edition, I would say, is the most balanced. Out of all of the other editions, I'd say 5th edition is the most at that, I think.
Well, balanced and fun, because one would
True.
argue that 4th edition is the most balanced, which, sure, but 4th edition's also a load of horse shite, so.
Yeah, it was almost like too underbalanced in a sense. Like, from what you've said, Rin, that everyone was basically doing the same thing, correct?
It was, we'll get to 4th edition. Oh, we'll get there.
Right, but I mean, as in, to correct me if I'm wrong, you did state, though, that at least, like, with 4th edition, it was really, like, it sounded like it was more, like, underbalanced, in a sense.
No, it was overbalanced. Everyone acted the same. Roleplay was basically just either pointless or monotonous, because it didn't matter, and everything was centered around combat. And combat took forever.
Hmm.
So 4th edition is, I guess, balanced, but also broken. It's weird.
Yeah. Book, what do you...
I always loved 2nd edition, because,
Yeah.
like you said, 1st edition was very technical and pretty realistic, which, yes, very much so.
1st edition was, yeah.
2nd edition was the game where they realized, this is a game. We should have some suspension of disbelief. Like,
Yeah.
it fixed a lot of the issues that 1st edition had, but it did take away a few things. It added a lot, though. It added feats. Feats were great.
Yeah. Book, what do you think is the fair area, basically the balanced area of D&D?
Personally, I'm a fan of 5th edition. Because, for me at least, I've noticed 5th edition gives you a lot more room to play with the more story-based aspects of a game, rather than just playing with stats and numbers.
Yeah. Unlike 3.5, which was basically exactly that. Am I correct?
Yes, that's right.
So my question is to you then, Book, is like, all in all, a 5th edition that is, of course, is really great, and I do love 5th edition the most out of all the other editions. As someone who's played most of the editions, I would say, which one, other than 5th edition, do you think was balanced? Because I don't know all the editions you've played. At least I don't remember all the editions you've played.
I have only ever played 3.5 and 5th, and I prefer 5th.
Makes sense. I think we're gonna be starting to flock towards the stupid area, which is in between broken and fair. So, if there's nothing else we can add for the balance and fair, we're gonna go into the stupid area now. Rin, why don't you start us off with the stupid area? Which edition made it really bad?
I mean, as much as I did enjoy 3.5, there were a lot of things about it that were really, really dumb. Like, but they were kind of dumb in a funny way, because 3.5 is the edition that I consider to be the most chaotic, the most just, you can basically do anything. The character concept you could come up with in 3.5 were just some of the most, it encouraged the most creativity, the most ingenuity, but at the same time, it was really, really dumb in how it balanced things. Like, the main issue that 3.5 had was that if you play a martial class, like a fighter, or a barbarian, or a ranger, or a rogue,
Right.
you have a set amount of damage you can do until you complete your feat build. And sure, great swords are great and everything, and so are, battle axes, great axes, the latter, whatever. But
Mhm.
here's the thing. Overall, from levels 1 to 20, a fighter will do, in 3.5, will do the exact same thing. They will hit you with their weapon, whatever that may be. Whereas a wizard has the ability to completely replace anyone on their team with the access of spells that they have and the feats that they have. And it's not just wizards either. It was sorcerers, it was druids, it was clerics. Mages were so unbelievably overpowered in 3.5 because they had spells for everything. Why would you need a rogue to, sneak up onto a building and, try to sneak their way in when the wizard can just cast knock from 3 miles away while the player, like, just, glares at the rogue while he does it, because why not? Why do we even need a fighter on our team when the druid can just cast enlarge self on himself, enhance ability, and then now he's putting out more damage than the fighter, and then he also casts bless on his animal companion. So now the animal companion, the fucking dog, is more tankier than the barbarian. This happens all the time in 3.5. There's just so much about it that's like very mage favored.
Yeah.
And if you like mages like I do, then you may think that's not an issue, but I'm also a huge fan of team balance. Anytime I join a campaign, one of the first things I ask is, what is everyone else playing? So
Yeah.
that I know how I can contribute, what my character needs to be to balance out the team.
Right.
With 3.5, you basically just really only needed a barbarian or a paladin, and the rest could just be mages, and you'd be fine because
Yeah.
they can take care of the rest. So that was
Right.
very dumb. Um, Fourth edition. Oh, fourth edition. So much. It promised so much and gave us so little. Fourth edition's combat was a slog. Single combat could take up to 4 hours. And they also introduced the power system, which the power system basically turned into, spells and more spells and spell slots and different feats. But back then, you had what you called daily powers and encounter powers, which sure, they were fun, but they all suffered from what I call too awesome to use syndrome, where you wanted these abilities at all times, but you didn't have them at all times. You could only use them once per like long rest. And here's the other thing. If you went into a dungeon and let's say you encountered a group or a mob, you use your powers to take out that mob, right? And then you go down the hallway, you go through some doors, blah blah blah, and now there's another mob. Well, guess what? Your powers didn't reset. So now you're screwed.
Yeah.
This was another thing that was wrong with 4th edition. 4th edition was very, 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 very combat centric. And the issue with that is because everyone had the same basic type of powers of, what's this? You missed an attack reroll to, try again essentially. Because everyone did that, everyone basically played the same. And role play and skill challenges were basically just roll this dice a couple times until you get the effect you want. So when you combine all those things together with the fact that they stripped out like more than half of 3.5, and 4th edition was like proposed really, really pretentiously. They were like Wizards of the Coast almost wanted to act like people who played 3.5 were ashamed of it, and they were like, don't worry, you don't have to play bad old 3.5 anymore. Now you have 4th edition, and it's going to solve all of your problems. It
When really
just, yeah, like, no, we didn't ask for a whole different type of D&D. We asked for fixes for 3.5, which is what Pathfinder ended up being.
Hmm.
4th edition, at the end of the day, when you boil down 4th edition, it's not D&D. 4th edition is chess with weird rules. That's what it is. And if you're not into if you're into like MMORPGs, 4th edition will be great for you. I love MMORPGs, but when I sit down to play D&D, I'm not in the mindset of playing an RPG. I'm not going into D&D with the same mindset that I would when I'm playing Fire Emblem,
Or Skyrim.
or Skyrim. Yeah, like I want the role play. I want the social interactions and the skill challenges to mean something. Role playing was pointless in 4th edition.
Yeah.
It was just there was so. Oh, and the other thing that I would find very stupid is who the hell thought it was a good idea to give every class the healing surge ability that fighters get for 5th edition, and they got like 3 or 4 of them, which is another reason why combat took so long, because monsters also got this. So you could have, as a DM, if you wanted to challenge your party in 4th edition, you basically had to force them to burn through their healing surges so that you could start to kill them. No one ever
Yeah.
really died in 4th edition, so not only was combat long as hell, it was also pointless. Because in the
Yeah.
end, it's like you're gonna win anyway. You just have to last long enough.
Or like as in when I made the grapple knot for our campaign for Zaun, basically we had it that I gave the action surge, or not the action surge, but like the surge that heals you from fighters, and gave it to both fighters and for barbarians, as long as they take that tree, of course. And it's because, of course, how difficult I've made the campaign, they are going to be taking the most amount of damage. So I tried to like balance things, because there's a lot of things I've tried to balance, like the new shaman class that just came out yesterday. That I placed in and placed down. I was trying to balance it because, knowing myself, I like to put in this like broken stuff, which would be broken to other campaigns, but to my campaign, it's actually balanced. But in the long run, I was thinking, well, what if instead we just make it to be able to be like balanced for other campaigns, so then maybe the other DMs um can be able to like use this class, or let other players use this class for their campaigns, I was trying to make it a balance, but looking at the other classes and thinking about how we discussed about like how, of course, 3.5 wasn't the greatest with wizards and stuff like that, I had to make sure I was looking at 5th edition, because I'd say 5th edition, like, again, is the most balanced out of all of the editions, I would say. Because, like, it's the only way to really best to find a way to make an actual class, like a special class or something like that, is to look at the 5th edition, because if you look at the other editions, it just starts to go haywire, if you know what I mean.
Right. And 5th edition, despite how great it is, you're not getting off the hook either. So let me start with why barbarians are bullshit. No, I'm kidding.
I'm about to say, bitch, don't you dare! But yeah.
5th edition, I will say there is a couple things that I didn't really like at first that thankfully they have fixed as time went on, because books keep getting put out for this. But
Yeah.
at first, monks really, really, really sucked. I mean, first of all, thank you 5th edition for making the Hunter Ranger not the most ass class in the game.
Yeah.
Very appreciated. But on the flip side, why the hell did monks suck so much for like a good year? Like, unless you took a specific multi-class, monks had like the worst economy when it came to not their skill points, their key points. It was awful, and this was especially apparent in Way of the Four Elements.
Yes.
Because you wanted to cast these spells, and you wanted to, do your flurry of blows, but you could not do both at the same time. And the class just didn't allow you to do that. You basically were either a shitty mage or a slightly bad fighter who got to attack more. Like, monks have always been a mixed bag for me, because they're kind of like the jack of all trades. They can do any one thing pretty well, but they don't excel in everything. Or no, I'm sorry. They excel at doing everything, but they have not mastered doing any one thing.
Right.
That's something that I feel 5e has kind of dropped the ball on, so that's why I'm very excited for 6th edition. coming
Or
out in like what,
5.5.
2 years or 5.5, whatever they're gonna end up calling it. I'm pretty excited for that. But
Right.
another thing that I wish they would help out a little bit more is warlocks. Warlocks have practically like no spells other than their
Yeah.
eldritch. They rely heavily on their eldritch invocations, because other than that, like, you really only get like 2 or 3 spell slots. That's why warlocks use eldritch blast so much. It's not because it's their favorite spell in the game, it's because it's their most versatile and because it doesn't cost spell slots. Like, a warlock casting eldritch blast should be considered the same to DMs as a
An artificer.
barbarian hitting with their great axe,
Oh, that I
or
was
a
gonna say.
ranger shooting with their bow. Like, that's, you should consider an eldritch blasting warlock doing the exact, it should be the same thing, because that's what it is. I've
Right.
seen posts of DMs who are like, "Hey guys, I'm looking for a monster that resists force damage." And when asked why, they said, "Well, my warlock seems to only ever really use like hex and eldritch blast, and I want to encourage them to use other spells." And the whole comment section was like, so let me tell you why that's stupid.
Yeah, it's like, well, there's a reason, because it's like warlocks don't get a lot. Like, that's why I made Spellblade for the Hexblade type of thing. Was for the warlock that's trying to go for like the Hexblade that you're going for in my campaign, to actually have more versatility, more spells to be able to have at their disposal, and so on and so forth. Because I've noticed that with warlocks, because I was looking up for warlocks when I was making Spellblade, when I was thinking of Spellblade, and I was looking it up, and I'm like, why do I barely see any warlocks these days? I barely see any warlocks anymore. So
Yeah, I think you even told me that like I was one of the first warlocks you had seen in a long ass time.
yeah, the last time I ever saw a warlock was fucking before I took my 3-year break of D&D. I never saw a single warlock before that. So when when you came up with a warlock, I was just like, well, shit, I better go check out warlock so I know what the fuck to do. And seeing that, like, what Hexblades get and what the warlock itself gets, I was like, this is not gonna cut it. For this campaign, this shit ain't gonna cut worth a shit. So I'm gonna have to make a class.
Too.
Yeah, I
Literally
did.
called me and you were like, where are all the warlock spells? And I was like, aw, first time.
Yeah, that was like, because it was like, I've never played a warlock. I've always played barbarians and paladins, but the only time I played like anything outside of a barbarian, like barbarian bard or barbarian druid or whatever, I would always make sure that if it's a spellcaster that's mixed with my barbarian, I always had help from DMs helping me make my sheet. Because I never really looked into the spells area, because playing barbarians for the longest period amount of time, I didn't really look outside of the box, in a sense, until I started actually multi-classing with the spellcasters. As I was always told, oh, barbarians are great to be multi-class with fighter, and then that was it. I didn't, and that's why felt like was a restriction until later on, and this was before I took my 3-year break of D&D. I was like, well, I want to actually try multi-classing with the spellcasters. One of my DMs said no, so I said F you, and went to another DM and like, hey, can I join your campaign? He's like, yeah, I'm just about to start our first session. I'm like, hey, can I make a multi-class of barbarian and a spellcaster? He goes, you know what you're doing, right? I'm like, yeah, I'm like, not entirely, but yes. I know if it's stupid, I'll just do it anyways, because I want to see how it works. And he goes, alright. And he just let me do it. So, like, I don't see a lot of DMs letting barbarians be able to multi-class with the spells. Like, sure, they'll allow it, but as in, they'll really judge it, in a sense. Because you can't use spells when in rage. So I understand that. But at the same time, it's good to still have that type of way, because I was seeing when I would be making like my multi-class barbarian and a spellcaster, we didn't have that spellcaster that I would take for a barbarian. Like, at one campaign, we didn't have a single bard in the entire group. I was the only barbarian bard. There was no other bard in our group. There was a point where there was no cleric, barbarian cleric. There was a point where we didn't have a wizard, barbarian wizard. There were times I would always have to like look at team balance, and I do like having team balance. It's just I always look at barbarians the most because they're the tankiest out of all classes, like the actual tanks. So
right. So
but
what would you say is in your
stupid.
experience, the stupid?
I would have to say 3.5 because I do not have a lot of experience with Dungeons and Dragons editions. Like I said, I only know 2 of them.
Mhm.
But for me, 3.5 just felt so much more roll heavy and so much more stat heavy. Like, you didn't even have enough time to breathe and actually flesh out your character because you had to roll to be able to breathe deeply enough. It just felt like you were piloting a tile of numbers instead of playing an actual character.
Ren said the
You
same
know?
words to me before, and yeah, I understand that. That's why I didn't really like Barrack's game 100%. Like, sure, Barrack's game was a fine game. I'm not putting anything to it. But it's that, like, because of 3.5, I've always been like, I don't like it all that much. Because, of course, you just feel like your stats on a sheet, your numbers on a sheet. Sure, there is some role playing in there, but a lot of the time it's like you have to roll to role play. And I'm just like, this is iffy, you know. So, it was a bit difficult to deal with 3.5, and I do understand your point there, but because of that type of thing, you're just feeling like numbers on the sheet. I feel you on that.
Yeah, 3.5 was one of those editions that I would agree. It had a lot of like stupidity in it. It was fun because of the chaoticness that you could get out of it, but the problem was that it also created bad experiences for players who wanted to play martial classes because eventually people started to feel like, why are we even here? Why don't we all just play, wizards and have one guy be the barbarian? And that's
Yeah.
not a good thing. That's why
No.
so many people were asking for a fix for 3.5. But when 4th edition came out, it was like, well, we made everyone balanced because we stripped out most of the things that made them unique.
Which edition came in for Eberron? Was it 2nd edition or 3rd edition?
I believe that was 3rd edition.
Okay, because I can't remember when Warforges were introduced, because I do remember at a 3.5 campaign, I've done a multiple of it, and I've told Book this a couple times, that I was having Warforges. And I was a Warforged main. I always played nothing but Warforged most of the time, and of course I would break Warforges. I'd say because reason of how I was breaking them is because I'd just be like, ooh, this class sounds nice, ooh, this class sounds nice, or ooh, this sounds great for this guy for what I'm supposed to be doing, so here we're gonna do that, and I put here, do that, so on and so forth. And of course they're all barbarians, but you know what I mean. Like, I was at that point making almost completely unkillable machines. And I didn't realize it until after the DM was like, wait a minute, why aren't you dying? I'm like, well, I have this, and that. Like, what? Why the fuck do you have? I'm like, because I just thought it sounded cool, and it works with the character, and and I'm within the class limit, so that's why I had stated on my TikTok page at one point that I break Warforges easily and I easily make them broken because of how, like, I just be like, oh, this matches, oh, this sounds good, oh, this works, and it just breaks the character without realizing it.
Yeah. Another stupid thing I could say about 4th edition was the fact that Magic was just so streamlined, and they dropped the Vancian type of casting. And that did finally break the caster supremacy, because I understand where Wizards of the Coast was going with 4th edition.
Yeah.
Because they were like, casters are basically reigning supreme, and it just feels like, why would you bother to play anything else other than them? If casters are so broken, we have to streamline them and fix them somehow. And on that, I agree, because I played 3.5, and yeah, mages were way too overpowered back then. That's absolutely true. But they went too far with it, and that it came with the sacrificing of casters being way less versatile and way less fun to play. The at-wills and ritual castings were a good idea, and I'm glad that carried over to 5th edition.
Yeah.
But in 4th edition, they were taken out. And, skills were also streamlined to be smaller, and they were also focused entirely around, like, adventuring, and thus, what skills people usually would dump? Trade and social skills.
Yeah. And there's only 3 editions I really played, like, fleshed out played, not just quit in the middle of. And I would say I remember playing 1st, 3.5, and of course 5th. Those are the only 3 I've ever played. So hearing about 4th edition, I'm just like, I'm only hearing it from other people. Of course, you mainly Rin. And hearing from what you've been telling us, of course, 4th isn't one of the best areas in a
It's
sense.
considered the worst of all of the editions.
Damn. Is there anything else that we have to put in for the stupid area before we go to broken? No?
I mean, yeah, I think I've covered my hatred of 4th edition pretty well.
And that was for the stupid area. Anything for you, Book? Any more to put in for the stupid area before we move to broken?
I will say this much. 3.5 versus 5th edition, to me, it feels like two sides of the spectrum, because on one hand you have 3.5 with much more control on what you can give your character, but then all you have control over in-game is your stats.
Right.
And then you have 5th edition, where everything is tied up into little packages, so you can get a lot done at once. But the trade-off for that is you can spend a lot more time on story and roleplay.
Right.
So, while I might consider 3.5 stupid for its overabundance of roles and stats, I understand someone else might like that. Like, for example, I know a few people who prefer 3.5 because they don't really invested in story-based details, they just want to fight.
Right.
So, I will say, just because I find it stupid, I do understand there are people who like 3.5 and don't really like the lost control that 5th edition gives you. I'm just saying I personally prefer 5th.
Right. Which, of course, we're just putting our own opinion in this podcast. This podcast straight up is to like help people understand the knowledge that we have, as well as putting our own opinion in at the same time. So okay, for some reason I have an ad going. But basically,
I'm sure there's people who like 4th edition because they like, combat war simulator, and that's fine. Like there's a bunch of RPGs out there for a reason. It's not what D&D should be. Like if you proposed me, a new game like a side game or something of D&D where it was like that, then we would have been fine with it. But don't give us an entirely new game and then paint D&D on it and think we're not going to notice, because we did.
right. So now we are going to move towards the broken. Again, I think we should have Rin start off with the broken, because I don't see a lot of things as broken, of course, except for 3.5, but, is there anything that you want to input for the broken area, Rin? Which was the most broken of the D&D that you think?
3.5. Mages.
Mages. Druids, mages.
As someone who's played... Alright, so... let me tell you a story. The 6th variant of Lilith Morgenstern was a wizard. And we had come to a dungeon that had 3 levels on it. And there were... the DM had set up, like, spike traps, but not on the floor. They were all on the ceiling.
Oh.
Right? So... if you touched a certain pressure plates, then the spikes would drop on us.
Mhm.
But what Lilith did was, first, she cast Levitate on herself. She went in, rolled, I think, a nat 20 or a 19, something really high, on, dexterity for getting past the pressure plates, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then, when she got to the 2nd floor, she cast invisibility on herself while the party was outside surrounding the entrance to make sure no one got out. Lilith went into the middle, cast, what was it called? Amplify or enhance ability. It was basically a spell that allowed you to increase the range of another spell, right? She
Mhm.
then cast Reverse Gravity, and every single enemy in the entire dungeon all of a sudden was flung upwards directly into the spikes in the ceiling. And then Lilith just, opened the treasure and walked her happy ass out with an entire horde of treasure and just gave it to the party. Didn't need anybody else. That entire encounter, that whole dungeon took 20 minutes.
Dear Lord.
Yeah.
I feel so sorry for that DM too.
Oh, he was furious. I was laughing my ass off, but he was furious.
Makes sense. I mean, if any of y'all did that
Oh,
with my
yeah,
campaign, I'd be the
mages
same
in
way.
3.5.
But yeah. Mages, I noticed with the druids, when I was doing Barracks game with the 3.5 for druids, I was realizing how destructive a lot of the classes were that was, specifically allowed for druids. I saw that, one of them, I think it was the Wrath of the Triceratops or something like that. And that straight up gave your pet more AC, and basically, I think if I remember right, gives it horns for a certain duration that equals more damage into its actual attacks. And I was just like, huh, this is interesting. But then I looked at fighters and barbarians because in case my druid died, I'd had a backup. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, what is this bullshit? Why is that doing more damage than what the barbarian could ever hold? And the thing is, that was a tier, if I remember right, it was a tier 3 spell for the druid. And I was like, what is this?
That was only 3rd level?
If I remember right, it was 3rd level, yeah, because I didn't stay in Barracks game for long, and I had that spell as 3rd level. Or something like that. Because my druid wasn't that high enough to be able to do higher than 3rd level spells. Or 3rd tier spells. And that was during 3.5, of course. If I remember right, for the Triceratops, or something like that. And that was straight up just like, okay, I'm gonna look at the Barbarian, because I was having that for my backup. Because I was gonna make a Barbarian fighter Warforged, because me and Barrick talked about it, that if my Druid dies, I can then bring in the Warforged guy. So I'm looking at it, and I'm just like, what is this bullshit? Barbarians can't do that. Fighters can't do that. What is this? And I was then like, this is not okay for druids to be able to do this type of shit. And for the duration, if I remember, it was like 1 minute or something like that, or like either it was for a turn, or if it was for like 3 turns, or I don't know. I can't remember exactly how many turns it was that it lasted, but still, it was doing more damage than a barbarian could ever breach, or even a fighter could ever imagine of, if you know what I mean. And seeing that, I'm just like, yeah, no, I'm glad I'm doing 5th edition, because if I did it doing 5th edition druid, and I looked at the difference between the 5th edition druid and the 3.5, and it's not as heavy damage of spells and so on and so forth, and mass amounts of spells that are available to the druids and stuff like that, compared to how it was in 3.5 for 5th edition. And it's quite an interesting one for the damage and everything. Like I said, if I remember right, it was a third tier, but still, that's like, what is this bullshit? Tier 3 spell that does more than what a barbarian or frickin' fighter could ever think of doing.
And it will only get worse from there. Druids can buff themselves to the point where they can outperform fighters. Wizards can basically replace rogues and fighters if they really wanted to. Like, evocation wizards can 1 or 2 shot entire encounters. Let's see, sorcerers were able to change spells to how they want things to be, which they still do now, but it's
But not as
way
absurd back then.
less. It's way less intrusive, and there's way less options, which honestly is a good thing. Like, sorcerers definitely took a hit in 5th edition, and druids also definitely took a hit in 5th edition. They're still good, but they're no longer the end-all be-all class that they were in 3.5. Now, druids kind of remain the summoner class, which is really interesting. I kind of like that concept of like, because before they were just nature wizards. They were just nature wizards.
Yeah.
They got to do a lot of the same things that wizards do. They just didn't get as many spells as them. Wizards were king because they had like 100 spells.
Right.
Sorcerers were great because they could change their number of spells to whatever they wanted. But druids were great because they were the buff maidens who eventually only really needed themselves and their animal companion. And thankfully, 5th edition introduced the Drake Warden Ranger, so finally Rangers can have pet dragons, so that's fun. And also, once again, they made the Beastmaster Ranger not the worst class in the game anymore, so thank you for that.
Mhm.
But another thing that was broken, and not in a good way, was the feat system in 3.5. You needed so many feats because skill builds took forever to write down, and like fighters would have anywhere from like 15 to 20 feats because you needed all of them, because feats were very, very, very simple in 3.5.
Yes.
They were like the most minute bonuses ever, like +1 to this, or advantage on that, or able to re-roll this, and that's it. So in order for a fighter to get anywhere near the power that they're able to get now, they basically had to either use most of their ability score improvements for feats, which you probably should do anyway because items and equipment can take care of ability score improvements.
Mhm.
You know, there's multiple ways to increase your stats. But the other way that they would do that is through multi-classing, and that brings us to our second point. The other thing that was broken in 3.5 was multi-classing. There were so many different builds and combinations. This is why DMs to this day hate multi-classing, because it caused a lot of issues, and Munchkins took advantage of it the most. They were able to come up with these complex, combinations that it just got to the point where DMs were like, I hate this. I hate you. I hate everything about this. Like
I was stating.
Even with clans, I only have one multi-classed character in all of Book's campaign, which is Elsis. And Elsis only has 2 levels in Warlock. The rest is Sorcerer.
Right.
And that's it.
And that's what I was trying to state, as in that I was able to easily break the Warforges, was because that all the Warforges was of the 3.5 and shit. So I was able to easily just start breaking shit left and right without realizing it. That's the thing. I wasn't realizing I was doing it until, of course, like I stated, the DM said, that's broken. And I'm like, what? Yeah, that's broken. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. I just put that together. I was then banned of Warforges. I did tell Book this. I was banned from using Warforges. And then I was banned from using Barbarians. So, having my 2 most favorite things being banned from me not being able to use in any of the campaigns, and it was straight up banned for everyone else as well, which everyone else wasn't really much of a Barbarian player anyways. I was the only Barbarian player in almost every single party. It was like, well, it's only just affecting me, because everyone else was playing like rogues or going for the paladins or the clerics, so on and so forth. Barely anyone ever played Bard in the group. Or not Bard, Barbarian. So it was only affecting me, which was the reason why I then left D&D, because it then felt like no more fun. Because I was just having everything banned from me.
In all honesty, you probably would have loved Barbarians in 4th edition because, they got to have all their at-wills and their... fucking same.
The only problem was that, I didn't want to play in D&D if I was going to get punished just for picking a specific class and a race. So that's why, I didn't ask Book if I could do Warforged or anything like that, and this at the start at least, before, of course, I asked her for how we're going to do Toxin and Leviticus and all that shit, But, I was on edge, and, of course, this is no offense to Book. If you remember with Shabadas, he was my dwarf, barbarian fighter, and I felt like at first, Book was making my goat do bad things and get my character in trouble because I was playing a barbarian, and that's where I felt the same, click happen. But, of course, after talking with Book and everything like that, it was able to easily get a lot better up, which I will state again, Book. I do apologize for how I acted at the start of Clans. I was just having a lot of old grudges with D&D, with old DMs. So, that was more of my bad. I want to apologize about that again.
Oh no, that was my fault. I just didn't know how to play Goat at the time because I'd only ever played one, so you were kind of the guinea pig there.
I see. But, besides the point, I would say that, like, a comeuppance in the end, D&D, depending on which edition is, well, D&D is fun, period. It's been with us for many years.
Coming up in 2024, it'll be
what? You cut out.
It'll be 50 years old in 2024. That's when we're getting 5.5 or 6th edition.
Damn.
50 years it's been played, and it's not going anywhere. But, Book, out of your experience, what would you say is the most broken of D&D?
Yeah.
What I would say is most broken is, depending on the edition you play, just from what I've heard and when I played in 3.5, is your DM has the full power, if you let them, to micromanage every single little thing you roll for. Especially in 3.5 and back.
Yeah.
There was a time in a 3.5 game where I had to roll to wake up. My party died around me, and I couldn't wake up because I kept on failing perception rolls.
Was that in Barrick's Druid game or no?
Not his Druid game.
Oh, then I don't know nothing about that. But I was wondering was I there when that happened, or did I leave, or was I not even introduced when that happened? Because I remember I had a tough time with Shepard with in Barrick's game with the Druid game. I had issues with that, but that was just something else entirely. But I'll let you continue. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh no, it's fine. It's just that's what I've always hated about certain games, and I'd like to think I can see those DMs a mile away, but just the fact that there are certain DMs who want to micromanage every single little roll you make. You want to breathe to make sure roll to make sure you don't choke on a bug. You want to sleep? Roll to make sure you don't roll off the bed.
Dear Lord. I'm glad I don't do that with Zon.
I'm playing a game, but in Monopoly you don't roll for every single space you move. You just roll and you move.
Yeah.
It's like it gets to the point where it's like, do you want me to just give you my character sheet and you can just play all of us?
Yeah, like I try and make sure I don't do that for Zon, because in 3.5 when I was co-DMing a lot of different campaigns, of course, it wasn't easy. I had a lot of players be angry with me being the co-DM of the 3.5 campaigns because the DM would have them roll, and they're looking at me to talk to him like, stop making us roll all these rolls, and it's like, I can't do anything about that. There's not that much I could have done in a sense, except let's just let him do his thing because he's the actual DM. I'm not the actual DM, I'm the co-DM. If I was the actual DM, I wouldn't have let those rolls go through, or I wouldn't have made everyone roll for every single little thing, but I stopped co-DMing in all campaigns after I was fed up with people getting upset with me that, the DM's making us roll all these stupid rolls, all these rolls that we don't want to deal with at the moment because we're trying to do something, and, it was just a pain because, 3.5 is where I'd say I loved it, but I hated it at the same time. I was in a 50-50 scale with it. Because it was in between 5 and it was in between 1, and I didn't play a lot of 5 before I left. I played more 3.5 than 5. So coming back and be able to play more 5, I actually do enjoy 5 a lot better, in a sense. So, Is there anything else for any of you two that want to talk about broken parts of D&D?
Well, it's
That's
like,
really all I can. Oh, sorry.
no, I was just saying, we'll just let book go.
Yeah.
That is really all I can think of that was truly broken to me.
Hmm.
Just the fact that there was so much that could be micromanaged in a D&D game. And if you meet the wrong person, how you really can just feel like they really just give you the sheets for show, and they want to control everything you do. Like,
Yeah.
forgive me for rambling for a moment. I had a DM who railroaded so much we may have as well been a train station. We were
Hmm.
never allowed to do anything, stay anywhere, say anything. We almost got chased out of a town in that game because someone offered an old woman rations and said he was sorry for what happened to her.
Dear Lord. I hope I don't do that to you guys in Zon. I hope I don't make you guys feel like dealing with that in Zon.
No, it is much better off in Zon. Which, considering the setting, should tell you a lot about how much of a hair trigger this guy had with dialogue.
Ah, I see. So
Yeah, but we progress
comparing...
pretty good in Zon. Like, and we
Hmm.
progress pretty good in clans when me and Clipper aren't, just talking.
Yeah.
Because unfortunately, Gwen and his character Satsa do bounce off each other very, very well, and I did not foresee that happening. So
Yeah.
there will be times where like Gwen and Satsa can have entire conversations just in the inn like it's a regular day.
Yeah, and it just takes forever before we see even...
It's like, oh right, we're playing D&D. I forgot.
Yeah, we're completely supposed to be on a plot line. Fuck. Yeah.
I will, that does get a bit annoying sometimes, but I do really like it.
Yeah.
Because I like seeing characters be characters. I like seeing them be people.
Right. I try and have that in Zon, but I also try and like push along because knowing how Clipper and Rin get when playing, their characters and playing full blood of their characters, you know what I mean? It at times I've realized with clans, because I've also been there a couple times with clans, that we don't move when them two start getting to talking with their characters, and it's just like I gotta start pushing the shit along, because my brain's on a deadline for what we're supposed to get done in that day or that session. So to make sure my brain doesn't get too racked up, I at least try and like let there be opening spots for like role playing, so on and so forth, but then actual story right on afterwards. And how I try and make it as well is that if I make you feel like you are your actual character whenever like you're trying to say your full words, but like your full sentence, and instead the DM would say, well, before you could finish that, instead, no, there's just a cut, and then immediately the other person interrupts like that. I try and make it feel like more as in, before you could go on to your rant, this is what happened, this is what this person said, to cut in, because I try to make it more realistic, in a sense. Like an actual book is being written, and you're being read an actual book, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, yes.
So, I don't try to be rude whenever I do DMing when it comes to Zon. I just try to make sure that, one, we're on story, two, we don't lose track of time, since we are really all of us are good at doing that. And I make sure that you guys actually feel like you're able to flesh out your characters and feel like you're your actual character when conversing with the NPCs. So, or when you're around certain NPCs.
Of course.
But anyways, on the conclusion of notes, we are going to conclude this. Any closing notes we should notify our viewers as well, other than hit the like and subscribe button, please, if you'd like to hear more. What else? Any other closing notes?
I just think that overall, D&D is a game that means a lot to a lot of people. ourselves included. And the reason why is because it offers something that not many other games do. And, other games have come out to try and capture just a slice of what D&D has done.
Yeah.
And so, because of that, there's a lot of good and bad in everything that it is. But at the core, D&D should just be fun. Because at the end of the day, it is a game that people come to, play and enjoy and experience. And so when you ruin it by, changing it to look like something that isn't D&D, or you just have, players or a DM that is just going out of their way to make everyone's, experience miserable, that's not a group you should be a part of. That's not a campaign you should be a part of. And a lot of the issues that, we've discussed in 3.5, sure, a lot of them can be fixed with, house rules, and
Yeah.
that's easy to do. But at the same time, you cannot deny that at face value, these things are a problem that, like it or not, needed to be corrected, and in some way or another were corrected. Either too much in the case of 4th edition, or perhaps just right in 5th edition, depending on, what type of player you are. But overall, I would say that 5th edition has been the edition that I have made the most characters for, and it's also the edition that I've had the most fun in, because I myself like a good healthy mix of 30% roleplay, 30% exploration, and 30% combat. And that leaves the last 10% to be character development.
And
And
creation on
this is
top of
the
that.
only place where I feel that this hits that exact mark. 3.5 was excellent for exploration, and it was excellent for, or 4th edition
Combat.
was excellent for combat. But they sacrificed things in regard. 4th edition was terrible at roleplay. 3.5 was terrible at roleplay unless you were a bard. There's a reason why everyone, the one person in every group would play a bard, because they were by far the best person to do roleplay, because I'm not having the fighter talk to people with his +2 to charisma.
Yeah.
And so
Boy.
5th edition hits that healthy balance, and I'm hoping that 5.5 doesn't drastically change things too much. I honestly hope that it just gives, tweaks to things. Like if 5.5 is just an addition of tweaks, I will be happy with that.
Yeah.
Completely happy with that. Because that's really all that 5th edition needs, is just tweaks here and there. Maybe more spell slots for warlocks, a better key system for monks,
Yeah.
a bit
Better
more feats.
I would say.
Better
Mhm.
what?
A better action economy for rogues and bards, I would say.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Like things like that. Just, tweak it a bit. Again, give us the fix for 3.5 that we initially asked for, and don't make this war simulator or MMORPG simulator, because that's not what we asked for.
And don't make it 4th edition.
Basically what I'm saying is 4th edition sucks, 5th edition good, and y'all have a great day.
Yep. With that, if there's nothing else do you want to close with anything other than that book?
I think everything was summed up really well. I do want to reiterate that because I am relatively new to D&D and relatively inexperienced, I may have gotten a few things wrong here, or said a few things that I don't quite understand the implications of, and all in all, I am just grateful to be invited to this.
You're welcome. And we'll have you again for whenever we're discussing with D&D or anything like that. And because I feel like it'd be best to keep you around, definitely when we were talking about D&D and so on and so forth.
Or
But-
Warrior. Maybe we'll just do a podcast on
Warriors, yeah.
Warriors.
Yeah, that too. But other than that, everyone, I hope you all enjoyed our good podcast that we had today, and thank you for listening in to the Lag of Legends podcast. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your nights or days, or however time you are watching this. And we'll be back next week. Me and Ren will figure out what we're going to be discussing about by next week. And otherwise, have a good night, have a good day, and have a good afternoon. Peace to all.